Well, the title of my talk is Salt Basins Exploration Risk. And this is a very interesting subject recently because some of the wells has been drilled and was a disaster. Some of them was pretty good. And this is, if we see the activities worldwide, here is the main salt basin we start with was the Gulf of Mexico. That's what everybody recognized, that under the salt there is hydrocarbon. Now we go into West Africa and Brazil. There were one salt basin and they split, but they are one of the major producers as well in the worldwide. The North Sea, the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, all of them shared the same thing, salt. And salt was the catalyst for generating the hydrocarbons, migrating the hydrocarbons to the trap, and seal the trap. So let's get started. Here is a cross-section from the Gulf of Mexico, which is the school. They call it the Gulf of America or Mexico, whatever. It is the school of the geology, the exploration, where they started everything. And you see the salt climb the stratigraphic section. It is the old sediments, it is the new sediments, and the salt coming from up depth. I hope that everybody understood the terms up depth, down depth, because I figured some of the geologists and the geophysicists would be interested. So the salt coming from up depth and penetrate the younger sediments. So the salt was here in the older section and reached the Pleistocene, which is the oldest part of the section. There are a couple of terms, subsalt and pre-salt. In the South America, the Brazilian section, the pre-salt is a good producer. And hopefully, worldwide, we can find what is pre-salt looks like. The autochthonous salt, which is the base of the salt, still stable, it did not move. However, the allochthonous salt, which is that is the term for moving salt, is the main exploration targets nowadays. What is the pressure functions from the kitchen, which is where the hydrocarbon generated, to the trap? So there are two functions here. This is Mother Nature does produce the source rock, bring the oil up, and goes migrate up, 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 up until the trap. And here is this is the geological process, which has nothing to do with it. Here is our function here, man-made process. When we reach the trap, we need to produce oil and gas. So you can drive your car, you can fly from east to west, you can do a lot of things. What is the main pillars of a good prospect, a viable prospect? Prospect in the geological term means a structure in the subsurface. You're going to drill it and produce hydrocarbon from it. So the four pillars, I call them four pillars, is the source of the hydrocarbon. And you're going to have a good reservoir, can receive the hydrocarbon, contain it for 10 million years, and deliver it when we drill to it. Also, number three is the seal. You have to have a seal. Otherwise, this hydrocarbon is going to seep to the floor, the sea floor, and has to be drillable. It's not 50,000 feet. This is not something has to be reachable with the drill bit. This is a recent slide or recent paper was written about the trap and the seal. Most of the wild cats, okay, 80% to 100% of their risk, either in the trap or the seal. So it is important to study the pressure in the subsurface to figure out if there is a seal or not. The conventional way, which is the most likely on a shelf or sedimentary basin, has no salt in it. We study the reservoir, said, well, here a good possibility of a reservoir. You got sand, shale at the bottom here. So this is an avenue for a good reservoir. And we study the seal as well. See, this is a good sealing area here. We end up with making a regional map, and we figure out where's our optimum trend to drill the next well. So for instance, here is a trend of the pressure and the stratigraphy. They meet together, and we came up with that Geopressure mapping system. It combined the pressure system and the stratigraphy and come up with an optimum trend. It is your optimum trend. Where is you going to find most of your successful prospects? And then we decide, okay, here is a prospect. We're going to drill here. This is in the conventional way of finding a prospect, good prospect. However, when we come to the salt basins, it's very, very tricky. There is a salt basin here. It's about 15 miles wide and about 40, 50 miles long. And this is one of the papers I was in the middle of my career, and I thought about it. Why most of these wells are producers in this side of the reservoir, and on the east side of the reservoir is not. We'll get to it. Let's go see what the salt looks like. The magic of the salt, the wonder of the salt. We're gonna tackle the geomechanics, and everybody knows that a buzzword, geomechanics, pore pressure. We're gonna just a little segment, and then we're gonna go to a few examples of what is the models looks like, and something new is not new, is about 15 years ago. We decided to distinguish between a dirty salt and clean salt. The salt has a very unique petrophysical properties. What is it? Low density. Compared to the surrounding sediments, it has low density, so it can float. Also, impermeable. Impermeable means have a good seal. If any deposits with hydrocarbon under that salt, is going to be a good possibility to find hydrocarbon in it. That's the very tricky part, ductile in nature. When you bury the salt down in the ground and you reach certain temperature and way deep, the salt becomes flexible and ductile, start moving around. Here is our stresses in the subsurface. We call that principal stress, PS, which is usually the overburden, the weight of the sediments. And then we have the intermediate one, and then the minimum stress. Those two stresses are the backbone of drilling geomechanics, the principal stress, and the minimum stress. When you introduce the salt to the sediments, here is a sediment without salt. Here is your density. Over here, you introduce the salt to the sediments column. What's going to happen? The salt is going to try to flow up, and the sediments weight going down. So what are we going to create here? We're going to create excess stress. Underneath is going to be the opposite. It's going to be less stress. If you have a salt ramp, your main stress is going to divert a little bit. And that's going to be your main stress. Now, how this has happened? Okay, well, let's go look at sediments coming to the basin. Load increase here. Salt try to squeeze out because they become like dough. They move around with depth and high temperature. So they go up. So what do we create here? We create a tectonic going up this way and shear going that way. It is your diaprism. I call it the diaprism up. Here your salt buoyancy, and here is the shear stress. What's the result here? The result is your main stress, which is the main one, is exceed the normal, exceed the OB or the overburden on the top of the salt, and less than the overburden on the basin itself, because there is a reduction. Now, we came up after collecting tons of data from the Gulf of Mexico and overseas, and we came up with, here is the traditional pressure plot for the subsurface. You have the hydrostatic, the principal stress, which is usually the overburden. Here you have your pore pressure. Pore pressure is supposed to divide it into two parts, in the shale and in the sand. Sand always linear. And then here, frac pressure. This window between the pore pressure and the frac pressure is the drilling tolerance window. You can go below, you can go above, and your mud weight has to be in between. This is a different story related to drilling. But anyway, this is our new conceptual model. Salt has no permeability, has no fluid, and the pressure in the salt is going to be steady. It doesn't change. Here is your principal stress. Here above, principal stress below the salt. Above is higher, below is less. Here is the index map I talk about. We design our 7 models from the Gulf of Mexico. Here is salt basins. This is the frontier salt belt too. This is the most producing trend in the Gulf of Mexico. But you call it the frontier salt overthrust or toe. It looks like a toe. Here is the models. I'm going to just go through 3 or 4 of them quick and tell you which one is good, which one is bad, and which one is ugly, because that's the title of the presentation. Here is a ridge, a salt ridge. Here is the sediment, they on the top of it. Here is unconformity here. Here is the hydrostatic. This is the trend of the fluid in the ocean or in the sediments. as linear as whatever the density is. And then here is the principal stress, which is the weight of the sediments. What is going to happen to the principal stress because the interference of the salt? The salt is trying to go up. Here is the salt buoyancy, here is the overburden, here is the principal stress. Is way above the overburden, which is the weight of the sediments. The pore pressure is going to follow suit, and also the frac pressure is going to follow the same thing. Here's an example. This is a field has been discovered late 80s and is still producing really good. If you look at the producing section right here, and here is the normally pressure to compaction system. Most of the producing sections in the overpressure section or overpressure zone. Yeah. And this is producing for 20 years now. So the point I'm trying to make here, that looking at the sequence stratigraphy before you drill a well and see where it ends, where it comes, where is the sediments ends, where it goes away. Here is the ramp. On the ramps, you get hydrostatic, lithostatic, or principal stress, and here is the same thing, the overburden, salt buoyancy, and the principal stress is not going to be vertical, it's going to be tilted, and this is the product of those two stresses or factors. Principal stress higher, pore pressure higher, and the frac pressure sits between the principal stress and the frac pressure. I forgot to tell you, the previous field was good. It was a good field. Now we go into another, that ramp. Here is the ramp, and this is a stratigraphic model. So what happened here, when the salt was growing up, the sediments was laying down on the flanks of the salt. So it thins out as the salt grow up. And this is 70% of the exploration, successful exploration targets come from this segment here. The salt is growing up and the sediments lay down on the seafloor. And here is the pressure profile, transgressive, regressive, and where you can have a risk here or no risk here. Let's see example here. When I start doing the pressure analysis, that's what I have in 2002 when I worked for the KSI. A lot of people know the company, software company. And we have no knowledge what this salt is going to do to the pressure plot. So this is the overburden. This is the weight of the sediments. Here is the frac pressure. And here is the mud weight. And here is the pore pressure. Look what happened when you run the LOT or the leak-off test, which is supposed to be the minimum stress. The minimum stress became way higher than the overburden or the weight of the sediments. What does that mean? It means the principal stress is way out here, is not the overburden. So that was a kind of puzzling a little bit, and nobody paid attention. We kept going, and everybody does it the same way. The principal stress was the overburden right here. But later on, I recognized that's wrong. It is the principal stress, should be. And you see here, this well was bad because it has 8 casing strengths to drill 10,000 feet and was plugged and abandoned because they lost circulation completely here at the bottom of the salt. Remember what I told you, below the salt, the stress is less. So they lost circulation because the interface between the salt and the sediment below was high mud weight. This is bad prospect. Now, another bad one's also, if the salt is growing up and the post, listen to that word, post sedimentation. So the salt cut through, and this is most of the bad ones come from the salt history, the relationship between the salt emplacement and displacement. This is need to be studied before we drill in the salt basin. When the salt came in and when it was salt comes out. So what's going to happen here when the salt intersect all the sediments later on? You're going to generate a gouge zone, rubble zone, or rubble zone, right? And the communication is going to be up to the seafloor. If you do have hydrocarbon here, they're going to go up to the seafloor. So the story of, I start with, at the beginning, I said this side is good, this side is bad. Because here, this salt is salt rich, growing with sedimentation. That's a salt pierce. When the salt intersect all the section hosts of sedimentation. And despite this is higher structurally than this side, this was a duster. Duster means dry hole. And here is the pressure plot for both of them. Here is the dry hole. Here is the producer. And you see how the pressure goes. Dead hydrostatic, didn't change. It did leak to the seafloor. Over here, it did not, because it has a seal. This is the top seal. So this is good. This is bad. Actually, this is bad because it costs the company to buy the lease 40 million and to drill the well is about 20 million. $60 million went down the drain. Also, this is the same basin I show you. There are correlation. We picked up the correlation between Zama discovery in offshore Mexico and this basin. The same thing. See, this side looks like this side is rich. Salt goes up, sediments lay down on the top of it and pinch out at the end. Now, let's see that big producing trend. We call it the salt toe or the salt thrust belt. I have a written paper with the help of my geophysicist and people I work with, and was published in the Interpretation last year. And I dealt with all the problems here in this area. So what happened here in that trend has increased the oil production in the Gulf of Mexico by 2 million. 2 million barrels a day, right here. So here's a seismic line go across that trend, that overthrust trend. Interesting. So that overburden becomes S3, the minimum stress. because the salt push that way, and here is the model. We generated this model. It make that anticlinal shape or the fold. It means that salt has stress, sideways stress, higher than the weight of the sediment. That's why it overcome the weight of the sediment and lifted the sediment up. This is produces like a gangbuster. Chevron, BP, Shell, I believe, all of them, they work on that trend. So here is the model. Sediment sitting deep, and the salt comes from up dip, from the shallower depths, and carry rafted sediments and create a gouge zone. So what this is going to do? Okay, it's going to change that system, the pressure system, completely. It is your principal stress. Here is your pore pressure, and here is your frag pressure. And you see how at this gouge here, your pore pressure and frag pressure went down. There are two wells. I'm going to correlate them quickly. One of them, they call it Jack, and the other one is St. Malo. The distance between them probably 20 miles, but however, this is Jack. Jack was a bad one because when we drill Jack, or they drill Jack, they have a big problem here. Let me give you a little bit of, this is a new plot I generated after we did our recent study. Here is the overburden, that pinkish line, this is the weight of the sediments. However, if you look at the mud weight here, that's the mud weight. Yeah. This, the leak-off test associated with the casing point. What we see here, we see the fracking pressure is on the top of, or the mud weight and the fracking pressure, they on the top of each other. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? All the mud weight or the mud is going to go in the formation, and we have a lost circulation. The drilling tolerance window is 0, and we're going to have a loss of circulation. That well, in this well, the loss of circulation continue for about 2 weeks. Any kind of treatment, sidetrack 3-4 times. Anyway, so, and here is the mud log. And it's saying no mud return. I mean, it was a disaster. This is one of the bad ones, really bad ones. I said, let's call it ugly, not bad. Anyway, about St. Malo is about 20 miles away. We drilled the same thing. I didn't drill it. They drill it. And here is our profile. Here is the pressure gradient. Here is the mud weight. Here is the pressure profile from our new equation or new method. And you look at it, it is very wide drilling tolerance window. So the frag pressure and the mud weight, they were far away. So what happened? They drilled through the salt, no problem whatsoever. And they went through the salt, out of the salt, kept to the same mud weight, didn't change until they reached their objectives. This is good and is producing really good. Here's the correlation between the bad, ugly, and the good. This is another one, another case in the Miocene between Atlantis, which is produced by, Atlantis and the Exxon Harden. It is a drilling terrace one that's very narrow, and they lost circulation several times. Here is Harden, was easy to drill and with no trouble. So this is the bad, and this is the good. So I do recommend, before we drill any salt basins, look at a lot of stuff. The displacement of the salt, where the salt went, the emplacement, the relationship between how the sediments lay on the top of the salt. Is it a basin? Or is it a crest? Is it an overhang? It's just a lot of things to do. So now from this section here, we see that salt going to the northwest on the line here. That's a breach zone. Any prospect here is a high-risk prospect. That's the bad side of the basin. It is a good side. That's a pinch out. So if you're looking for a prospect, this is a good one, or a good possibility. Found hydrocarbon. Okay, that increase the PS, decrease the principal stress. It increasing the principal stress. It decreasing the principal stress. So for any model to predict the pool pressure, we have to consider the principal stress rather than overburden. Overburden does not work in the salt basins. Yeah. This guy in 1925, that's way, way before I was born. And he wrote this little piece here. I mean, this section, this presentation is going to be recorded, and I hope so that you look at it again and read this thoroughly. And if you do have any questions, talk to me. And I am in LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn. We are in the AAPG, SEG, anywhere. I mean, if you want to reach me, especially me, because I'm not the boss. But anyway, so talk to me. And I do appreciate the GOPE 2025 would give us the chance to show you what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, and good luck to everyone. And I'm waiting open for any discussion.